Okay, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so just a real quick intro. I think most of the people on the call know who I am, but there are a few new people that I hadn't actually met before. So welcome. I'm excited to see you. I'm Adriana McLean, and I'm a growth strategist. So I work with typically mid-sized B2B companies, and I help them with their strategic planning in a way that clarifies their priorities, engages their employees, and ensures successful execution of their goals. I also have a platform, fulfillingstrategy.com, and that's where I talk about all things strategy. I have a blog, I have lots of good resources in there. So if you haven't checked it out, I would definitely encourage you to do that and sign up for my insights because there's some good stuff in there. So, and there, I know a lot of people on the call do. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hopefully you get value out of that as well. So I'm a total strategy nerd. That is just clear. So when I had an opportunity to take this online course, Harvard's Clayton Christensen's class called Disruptive Strategy, I took it because I'd been wanting to take it for a while. I just wasn't able to work it into my schedule. But early, the first quarter this year, I took it and it was really, really good. So I want to share with you kind of what it's about. So the course is based on Clayton Christensen's class that he taught for years in the business school on disruptive innovation and disruptive strategy. And it's based on his book, Innovator's Dilemma. I don't know, some of you guys might have read that. Damon, did you read that? And yeah. So really, really good stuff. And the whole idea behind really all of the theory is disruption is inevitable. It's just when it's going to happen. And disruption can be an opportunity before it's a threat. So you really need to be, instead of just pretending it's not going to happen, ignoring it, how can you kind of train yourself to look for those opportunities and leverage them? So that's what the course is about. There was a ton of information in there. So I had to pull out kind of like the top 5 things that I thought were most important and that you would find most valuable. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. So the 5 powerful lessons. First is that, I don't know if you guys can, that's messing you up. We're going to talk about where disruption emerges, that strategy is temporary. That's my favorite one. And that products come and go, but jobs to be done persist. And you need to focus on the performance defining component, and you can't disrupt yourself. All right, so we'll start with the first one. So where does disruption emerge, right? Like where do you go? Where do you look for it? And let me ask you guys a question. Are you guys seeing the whole screen? Okay, good, awesome. Okay, so I guess it's just my issue. Thank goodness. Okay, so there's basically 3 buckets of innovation, okay? The first being sustaining innovation. And this is the type of the innovation that we're used to, okay? Companies that are just, existing products trying to get better. There's low-end innovation and there's new market innovation. So these are the 3 buckets that Clayton looks at innovation, the lens through. So the first one, sustaining innovation. So those of us who've been involved in product development, this is kind of where we focus. And it's basically focusing on higher and higher performance for your best customers. So your target customers, the ones that are going to pay you for the value, how can you continue to provide better and better products and services for them? And the idea is you're improving your profit in the process and you leverage your existing business model. So this is really all about kind of continuing to innovate your core business. And in this type of innovation, the incumbents typically win. It's very, very difficult, as we all know, if we've tried, to disrupt a market leader trying to beat them at their own game. So that's sustaining innovation. Then there's low-end innovation. And this is really this is a disruptive type of innovation. So basically, this is where you target the low-end customers of an existing market. So it's a market that already exists, but these customers down here are being overserved by these products, the sustaining innovation, right? Like they don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles. So if something comes along that's good enough and it's a better price, then they're going to go down market. So this is typically The goal in this is really volume play, and it really requires a new business model. So as a result, this is really where you have new entrants that disrupt the market, because there's really no incentive for an existing incumbent to walk their customers downstream. There's no incentive there, right? So that's what happens here. Now, an example of this type of innovation would be like cutting the cable cord. Like, how many of you guys have gotten rid of your cable? Like, yeah, right. So same thing. I did the same thing. You have cable, you're paying a lot for it. There are all of these channels. I don't even know what they are. I don't watch them all. So if something comes along, like for me, it was YouTube TV. It was a fraction of the price. Granted, I don't have all the channels, but I don't need all the channels. It was good enough for me. And so that's an example of a low-end innovation. Then the third type of innovation, and again, is a disruption, is new market innovation. So new market innovation is when you are bringing new customers into a market, okay? So these customers either couldn't afford what was out there before, or maybe they didn't have the skill set to use whatever it is, but you're bringing people who were not part of the market into the market. And again, the performance is usually good enough in terms of what's out there today, but there might be better performance in terms of simplicity. Like maybe the product is easier to use. Maybe it's more convenient. So it's a trade-off on the performance side of things. Because this is a small, new market, the margins are lower and you're trying to gain volume, right? It's a new business model. So again, like with low-end innovation, new market innovation, this is a new entrance. There's really hardly any incentive for an incumbent to spend time and energy, right, of limited resources, trying to grow a new market innovation when they can invest in sustaining innovation that serves their core business. So these are the two areas: low-end innovation and new market innovation, where you typically will see disruption. And it is possible for an innovation to be both low-end and new market. That does happen as well. But this is where we need to identify where there's disruptive innovation in the market. Does anybody have any questions on that? By the way, stop me if you have any questions. I don't want you to feel like you have to wait till the end, for any questions.
Yeah, Adriana, a question I was always asked younger in my career, which I've since learned the answer, was why would you ever enter a new category with lower margins than you have today? Right. Back, when I was younger, that caught me off guard. But, as I've matured, there's tons of reasons, right? Huge revenue opportunity, could be a defensive play. You have plans for costing out to improve margins over time. But either now or later, if you could address just a little bit more of that lower margins position under the new market innovation.
Yeah. So, and the thing of it is, so initially margins are lower because you're not good at it, right? And there's not the volume. So like today, the margins might not be great and the performance isn't as good. But over time, number one, you're going to get scale. Your costs are going to go down. You're going to continue. What happens is, what's a new market innovation today eventually becomes sustaining innovation as it goes through the cycle. So yes, it may be a smaller opportunity today. Today, the margins may not be very good, but if that's where the market is going, then that's where the volume is. It's where you want to go. And what isn't very profitable today could be where all the money is tomorrow. Right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that's lower margins at entry, right?
Exactly.
Which, like you mentioned, can be improved over time. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're also going to talk about the innovation structure, how you structure your company for innovation. And that's going to play into exactly what you're talking about as well. So, okay. The second and my favorite lesson is that strategy is temporary. And I don't just love this because it keeps me busy and gainfully employed, but it is true. So strategy is temporary. This doesn't mean your vision, your mission, your purpose is not temporary, but how you're going to live that out is going to be temporary over time because, the market moves, things are disrupted. And it's really important to think of your business that way. So what your core competency is today may not be your core competency tomorrow. And that kind of plays in a little bit to what you're talking about too, Kevin. It's like, okay, that may be what you have to be good at today because that's what the market wants, but that doesn't mean that's what it's going to be tomorrow. And you got to stay, just being mindful of that and having that discipline can be so powerful when you're trying to create a strategy. And the reason your strategy is temporary, according to Clayton Christensen, is this idea of modularity. And this is what all markets move through in theory. And so just a trigger alert, if anybody has an aversion to kind of complex charts, I tried to make this simple as possible, but I'm not sure how well I did. So I'll try to explain as best as I can. But this is basically the reason that disruption is inevitable is because of the process of modularity. So what does that mean? So what we're looking at here is performance in the market over time, right? And initially, whenever you're starting out with an innovation, there's not very many people in the market. It's brand new, right? So there's not a lot of people participating in it because it's not attractive and the performance is lower, right? But over time, what's going to happen is, you're going to get better at the pieces of bringing the innovation to market. Because at first, when you bring something to market that's innovative, you have to make sure the market has everything they need to use your product. So for instance, like back in the day, if you were doing CD players, you would have to make sure that they could access music was made on CDs, that they could access it, right? That they're, that it could be sold in the music retail stores there. There's a lot that you had to do. Well, over time, those processes become more modular where people can come in and specialize in doing just that part of it. So it's not like one innovator has to take care of the whole market. So over time, what happens is you get more people in the market and the product itself or the solution gets better and better. Okay, so again, over time, you got more people entering, the barriers are lower, the demand is growing, so it's more attractive, till eventually you've got really high performance and you've got a lot of people in the market. So that's basically kind of the evolution of what happens with the market. Now, here's what's really important and where disruption comes into play. So this line right here, this orangish line, is how much of the performance can the consumers actually utilize and absorb. Okay. So when you're starting out with a brand new innovation, typically it's clunky, right? You don't have everything right. And if you're a new adopter, like, this, right? So the performance of the product itself is far below what can actually be used by a consumer. Think about like early cell phones, right? Car phones, like compared to now. Right. So early on, they could get better and better, and you could use the innovation. But over time, what happens is, we keep innovating, new people enter the market, they keep adding features. And there comes a point in time when the performance is such that big chunks of the market can't even absorb it. It's not even applicable. And so when there's a performance gap down here early on, that's where you're just working on trying to get the product up to speed. But over time, you have a performance surplus, right? And that's where there is a potential for disruption because there's people that are overserved. So there's an opportunity to disrupt. And so that's what this whole idea of modularity is, that over time, you get more and more entrants, they get more competitive, the offering gets better and better, and eventually there's an opportunity to disrupt that through coming up with something that's good enough. Okay. Any questions on that? I know there's a lot in there. So the whole point is really to skate to where the money will be, right? So I love this because Clayton uses whenever Wayne Gretzky was asked, why he was so good. Once he said, he goes, I don't skate to where the puck has been. I skate to where the puck will be. And I think that's a really good way to look at your strategy, because over time, where you're at in the market is going to change, right? It's going to evolve. And so where you're making your money today may not be where it's going to be tomorrow. And I think by just having that sort of mindset and that discipline, you open yourself up. You're being open-minded to where the opportunities will be, and not just, tied to where it has been in the past. All right. So the third big takeaway and lesson is, and you guys are they're involved in product development, I think will really appreciate that one. And that is products come and go, but what Clayton calls jobs to be done persist. So what do we mean by that? So basically what we mean are customers don't want your products and services. They really don't. What they want is they hire them to do a job. And it's really important to understand what problem that, they're trying to solve. And if you can look through the lens of your product or your offering in terms of what is the job that the customer is hiring them to be done, you're going to have a much richer view of the solutions that you can offer. So let me give you some examples. So we'll start with Spanx, okay? One of my favorite. So first of all, women, I can just tell you right now, I can speak for most women when I say women don't want to buy shapewear. First of all, we resent the fact that we need shapewear. So there's that. So we're not interested in buying shapewear. What we're interested in buying is what it does for us, right? What job does it do for us? And what it does is it helps solve wardrobe woes. And I'm taking this language actually off of Spanx website because that's how they're defining their purpose, is by solving wardrobe woes. So granted, they started out initially as a single product, a shapewear, but they look through the lens of what job are they trying to do? They're trying to help me solve my wardrobe woes. So what are all the products, the things, the solutions that can help me do that? And so as a result, they have a much broader lens of what could be potentially included in their strategy. And they've grown their product offering into all sorts of things that basically solve my wardrobe woes. I actually saw where they're launching some products for men as well, too. So any thoughts on that, Kevin? Because I see your face. So.
We men have wardrobe woes probably more than women.
Oh, I didn't mean that part. I meant this dress. I didn't mean on shapewear. So, but why jobs to be done lens is so important in looking at your strategy is it can really help you evolve your brand from just a product brand, right? So like when you're at the product level, if you're thinking of what you do as just the product that you offer, that's a really limited view, right? And so if you can say, well, what is the job to be done that my customer is hiring, right? You can integrate even more things into that. If you look at as part of this job to be done, what is involved? What are the experiences they have to have in acquiring this right solution, in using this solution? So if you think of, okay, this is the job they have to be done, what are all the things associated with it? You can integrate and add products, services, solutions that kind of enrich that whole experience, and it helps you differentiate. And then you continue to do it. So eventually, you become a brand that customers think of. That's what, you become more of a purpose brand. It's what they think of you when they think of that job to be done. And I think what's really important about this is really three things. Number one, if you think of your business as more than just, a product or service, what's the job to be done? It helps you identify your real competitors. Because what you don't want to do is say you make pens. You don't want to look at your market in terms of your competition or pens, because they're not. They're pencils, they're styluses, they're anything that helps solve that job to be done of writing, recording, however you want to define it. So it helps you look more broadly and appropriately at your competitors. And then second, it helps you through integration and offering more complete solutions for your customers. You can, differentiate yourself. And then ultimately, the third thing is it can help you avoid disruption, or at least identify where disruption might be occurring in your industry. If you're looking more broadly than at just your, your product, you're looking at the entire job to be done. So this was a really big part of the course, because it, in doing so, I think it just really helps you evolve from a product brand, which is where a lot of people are. It's just like, this is the product I serve. But if you think about it, how many products have a finite life cycle? Products come and go. Think about, I'm old enough, remember fax machines, right? There's fax machines. Think about Garmin GPS, right? Those products have come and gone, but the problem that they solve remains. It's just something else has stepped in to solve that problem. So if you want to stay, relevant, look at look at your strategy through that lens in what terms of what you offer. Any comments on that or questions? Okay. All right. So the fourth key lesson is that it's important to focus on the performance defining component. So what on earth is the performance defining component? So this is the part in the value stack of your value proposition that provides the most functionality to the customer. Like, what does a customer care most about? Because in terms of what you offer in your value proposition, there's a lot of things. You may have a lot of benefits, right? You may say, these are all the reasons you work with me. These are all the things that my product does or my service does. But in there, it's very important to know what is most important to your customer, because not everything is weighed equal. And whatever is most important to your customer and they value the most, you need to make sure that that is what you are focused on and that you do better than anyone else. And so let me give you an example. So let's say that you are an infant car seat manufacturer and you solve the problem of keeping a child safe in the car, right? An infant. It's great if the car seat is lightweight. It's great if it looks good. But at the end of the day, you know, most people would say the performance defining component is the safety that it provides, you know, for your infant. And so that's something that you really want to make sure that you've nailed in everything that you work on in terms of your product and your offering. And I know that this can happen too. People can kind of get bored, for lack of a better word, with some of that. And you can get distracted and kind of get off strategy by trying to do other things, but really being focused on what is most important to your customer is critical. And that takes discipline. I mean, it really takes discipline. And the reason this is really important is this is where the profits are made, because at the end of the day, your customers will always find money. They will always find the resources to pay for what is important to them, right? Whatever is most important. The bells and whistles and the extras, maybe not. But knowing what is most important to them, you know, that's where you're going to make your money. All right. Any questions, comments?
I had one. This resonated with me, Adriana, because I think you mentioned before, what's important to them will likely change over time, right? I think about several of us worked on a drill bit category, right? And back then it was speed. And we got to the point where everybody was fast. And yes, we could innovate making that drill bit, you know, a quarter of a second even faster. But you know, it wasn't going to be differentiated enough, right? Once everybody got used to that benchmark, they want more speed? No, not really. They wanted something else. So, but I think you mentioned the comment earlier that, like most things, right, it will change, right? The job still needs to be done, but how they go about it can change.
I'm so glad you said that, because I actually forgot that point. Because one of the things that is super important is making sure you have a pulse on what that performance defining component is, because exactly what you said, over time, it can change. So one of the things I recommend, and I think this is in my very last blog post about customer insights, is whenever you're getting feedback, you know, like quantitative, let's say feedback from your customers on how you're doing, you know, versus certain attributes. So those attributes should be what's in your value proposition, and, you know, the performance defining component should be in there. The other thing I think is really important to ask is, how important are these things to them, right? Because then you can kind of measure over time, is this changing? You know, is it, before it might have been essential and now it's like, nice to have, I expect it. Maybe it's the ante in. So having a pulse on not just how are you doing, but how important are those things to your customer, so you can make sure that you're designing to what matters most to them. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, and the very last concept lesson is you can't disrupt yourself. We'll argue that, we'll talk about that, but that's a key takeaway. And, you know, there's a reason that Blockbuster is, you know, the cautionary tale that it is. It's very, very difficult for incumbents to disrupt. If you think about the disruptors in most markets, it's typically people who are not inside the industry, right? For a reason. So let's talk about that. So the big reason, this is what I was pointing to earlier, Kevin, is one of the reasons it is so difficult for someone to disrupt themselves successfully is because of how we're organized for innovation. So your business model is based on three things: your resources, right? What resources do you deploy, the processes that you have, and your profit formula. So the profit formula is how you decide to allocate your resources, what you decide to invest in. And that kind of goes back to with sustaining innovation, higher margins, that's great. New market innovations, lower margins, what's your profit formula, right? How are you going to get approval to do it? So depending on how you're organized, this is going to be huge. And what happens is leaders will often try to force a new innovation. And again, I'm not talking about sustaining innovation, because sustaining innovation would fit right into your processes, your profit model. But disruptive innovation, they'll try to force it through existing resources and existing processes. And this does not work. Your core business will attack that innovation like your immune system will attack a virus. It will kill it. So this happens a lot of times, and they think, well, we'll allocate resources to manage it and things like that. It never works. And then secondly, one of the biggest reasons is the profit formula determines what organizations can invest in. And, if your profit formula is geared towards sustaining innovation, you're never going to approve something that is lower margin, walks your customers down market, or is a smaller market opportunity. And I think, Dawn, you're on here, so I know you'll appreciate this. You'll get an amen. We experienced this when I was at Rubbermaid, when we had our consumer division for food storage products, and we had a commercial division for food storage products, all in the same, being run through the same company, through the same profit formula. And it was very, very different, because your consumer business, sold to Walmart, Target, the big retail outlets, very different model than food distribution. And so when we were trying to get product development approved, we didn't have the volume, we didn't have the margins to get the attention that the consumer did. And we were running it through the same system, applying the same rules, and it just doesn't work. It didn't work. And I think they've changed it too. I don't think they even do that anymore. They separated it back out.
You're correct on that.
Yeah. So you felt that pain before. I mean, it's just, you just have to be aligned.
Right. And I feel actually an opposite pain with my current company, because we have also a professional line as well as consumer line. And the consumer line has incredible volume, much lower margins. And so you're fighting for those resources as well, because, you look at the professional, less volume, double the margins. And so it's always a balancing act as to how do you get those scarce resources from an R&D as well as a Marcom.
I think those are some of the most important decisions a business makes. And a lot of it depends too. Are you a public company, or are you private, or, or held by, private equity? Are you family owned? All those things can affect that profit formula. So Cautionary Tale, we've all heard of Blockbuster and Netflix, right? So in 2000, Blockbuster's market cap was around $5 billion. Netflix was 50 million. And as it's widely known, several times Netflix offered to sell / begged, from what I've read, their business to Blockbuster for $50 million. And Blockbuster was not interested. So I'm curious, what do you guys think about that? What are your kind of, what do you think from Blockbuster's point of view? Why did they walk away from that?
I mean, they just couldn't see forward into this whole streaming market. I think it's happened so fast, the streaming market. So for me, in the last 2 years, it's now it's just a thing. But I feel like 4 years ago, it wasn't even a thing that I could even imagine what it is today.
Absolutely. And it was very interesting, because they always had a vision, Netflix did, of streaming, even when they started their mailing. They knew eventually, but they couldn't start there. But then trying to convince a company that has built a $5 billion business on something else, it's tricky. And I think the problem, Blockbuster is public, or was public, And, I think asking your investors that, to say, hey, you know what, we want to invest in something that is not going to leverage the 10,000 employees we have. It's not going to leverage the thousands and thousands of stores that we have, even though they're leased, right? You've got all of that. It's not going to leverage the existing inventory, the millions of dollars, but, and it's going to be a small market, but we think it'll be big one day. I mean, it's just a very, very tough sell, if you're the one trying to sell it. Then you flash forward, right, to 2021, Blockbuster essentially gone, and Netflix is valued at over $200 billion. And to add insult to injury, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Netflix is airing a documentary on Blockbuster, right, Damon? Yeah, called The Last Blockbuster or something like that. I was too sad to watch it. I was like, I should watch it. But I'm like, no, because I don't know. I remember I used to love going to Blockbuster, and I was just like too sad to even watch it. But
I watched it.
Did you? Is it good?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It just talked a lot about, the Blockbuster brand, and it was more nostalgic. It was interviewing different people, talking about the nostalgia of Blockbuster and what it meant for them, and that kind of thing. It didn't get too deep into the business operation of it, but there was I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but in case they wanted to watch it, but there's a small component to it, but it really was more about actually the brand more and the nostalgia and the relationship that people had with that brand and the experience versus the nuts and bolts of behind Blockbuster.
I gotcha. Well, and it's, this is another example of kind of jobs to be done, right? I mean, granted, Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, but the job of entertain me, right? Show me movies does still exist. It's just it exists in a different way. So, okay. So you can't disrupt yourself, but you kind of can. If you can't disrupt yourself in your existing form is basically the concept that's taught here. But let's talk about what you can do, because there have been examples of disruption that's been successful. I don't mean pivoting, I mean real disruption. And the first thing I would like to offer is that, inside your organization, it's really important that you provide a process for innovative ideas to reach the top, right? Because you don't want it to go through the people who are out in the field, who are closest to the customer, they're closest to the job to be done. They're going to see things, they're going to see, opportunities. And what you don't want is you don't want that to have to flow through kind of middle management or be filtered because it's not on strategy, right? You want these ideas, you want a process so that ideas can flow up and, make their way to the C-suite. So that's one thing you can do to just kind of get ideas to flow. It's just important to have that free flowing from the bottom to the top. But then the next thing, which is most important, is you have to allow disruptive businesses to run completely independently from the core business. And that is really the key. And where you've had success, that's what's happened. So 2 examples. So Morgan Stanley, when they launched their online brokerage business, it was going to disrupt. There was a part of their existing business that it would disrupt. They ran it completely separately, and it was wildly successful. Another example in the retail world is Target. If you remember, at one time it was Dayton Hudson, and Dayton Hudson stores were the majority of where all of Dayton Hudson's money was made. But when they opened up this Target format and started seeing success in it, it was a different profit model. It had different processes. It was very different. And they always maintained it completely separately and let it grow and take its course. And you know how that ended. I mean, now it's Target, and that is their business. So that's the key there, is just making sure that it's run separately, it's a separate company, and the business model is allowed to be the business model that makes sense for that innovation. And the problem with this is that takes resources, that takes an investment. And I think what happens is a lot of people that want to innovate, companies want to innovate, but they don't want to make that sort of a investment in running something separately and looking at it, separately. And so they try to force it into their core business, and it's just not a good plan. So, All right. So those were the 5 lessons. And what we're going to do now is I'd like to take those 5 lessons. First of all, ask if you have any questions. And then we're going to move to a case study that I'd like to kind of share with you and do a quick little breakout, just kind of so you guys can talk amongst yourselves about this disruptive innovation in 3D printing. But first, before we move there, does anybody have any comments or questions and clarity around these 5 key lessons? And again, this was a course packed full of stuff, but for me, these were the ones that I felt were most valuable. Anything to add? Okay, so what I'd like to do is I thought it'd be helpful to look at these ideas through the lens of a case study that I actually did for my final paper in the course. And so basically I took LGI Homes, which is a home builder, and the idea of 3D printed homes, 3D printing technology. And I took a position on what LGI should do. But I wanted to share that with you guys, just the innovation in LGI, and then have you guys kind of talk a little bit about what do you think LGI should do and just kind of share. Because I thought it might make these ideas a little bit more meaningful, maybe, and relevant. Nothing, no pressure here, right? This is just a friendly conversation. But first, if you don't know about LGI Homes, LGI is the 10th largest home builder in the US. They're publicly traded, and their whole focus is entry-level affordable homes. So their homes range from 166,000-ish to around 350. And they've been wildly successful. They've been growing, right, Kendall? I mean, these guys have been growing rapidly. But the point here is they're at the low end of the market. So there's this new technology, 3D printed homes, that I think LGI needs to pay attention to. So I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to hope this works, a short little video. If you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I sent this out on 3D printed homes. So here I go.
It may look like toothpaste, but this 3D printing technology is spitting out a 1,900 square foot house. The concrete foundation, interior and exterior walls, and utility conduits. This is the final product.
We're trying to build houses in half the time for half the price.
New York-based SQ4D printed the model home in about 2 days with barely 3 workers, and it's cheap.
Our profits will be higher, and we will be able to show that with more projects that we do.
How do you sell a 3D printed house?
I'd like to think it sells itself.
What is the weirdest thing anybody has ever said to you when they walk into this place?
Oh man, is it plastic?
The company now has the permits to build on this site down the road, the first 3D printed home for sale to the public. 1,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, listed at just under $300,000. That's about half the price of a comparable new home in the area.
The offers are in the thousands. We are getting, people are seeing the price across the nation and loving that.
Potential buyers like the Johnsons from Kansas City are already lining up.
We've been looking since September of last year. A lot of the homes in the 2 counties, it's just impossible to find anything at this price.
And this quality.
So this is the result, the raw result of 3D printing. It's kind of like concrete corduroy, but if you don't love this look, they can smooth it out for you and make it look just like a regular wall. But for the home builders, this is a real game changer. Right now, they're up against a severe labor shortage as well as skyrocketing prices for lumber. And both of those are combining to just make their costs really, really difficult right now. So this could address both of those. Back to you guys.
Yeah, Diana, that's amazing.
Okay. All right. Isn't that fascinating?
I'm fascinated by that. I've watched that a few times and I've already shared it.
And I think the one thing I don't know exactly is, I mean, first of all, being from Oklahoma, I was like, that is like literally a panic room, like your entire house because of tornadoes. I mean, if I don't know all the structural things there, but I don't know what you like. How do you put nails in concrete? I don't know. Like, is this an opportunity for 3M? Like, there are all of those things here. And so, and I think what will happen is a lot of times when, you know, again, this is new innovation. Okay. So it's the performance isn't quite there yet. Right. but it'll get better. And I think what happens and what we have to be careful of is at first, when the performance isn't there, we say, well, it's not good enough yet. You know, we don't really have to worry. Our customers aren't going to want that. But the point is, it gets better. It always gets better, and it will get better. So, you know, being very clear-eyed about that. The other thing is that homes that they talked about were priced pretty high, but the actual cost to 3D print a home for around 1,200 square feet is like 10 grand. I mean, it's not a lot versus, and stick built, you got this whole lumber issue. So affordable housing, all those things. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because, you know, they were offering the home for $300,000, but you really can print homes for a lot less than that. So anyway, very, very interesting. And so now you have a home builder who their whole process has been set up around stick building, subcontractors, their whole, and LGI attributes a lot of their success to the way their processes work. So they've got a certain model. Now you have this coming in. So I'm curious. I thought it would be interesting if we broke out maybe for like 5 minutes or so, and you guys just kind of talk about like, what would you do, you know, if you were LGI? Like
3D
what?
printing and what it can do in real estate, but 3D printing technology.
Sorry about that. You know what? What would you do if you were LGI? Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to attempt to do a breakout room. I hope you guys are cool with that. We'll just do 2 breakout rooms, and we'll spend about 5 minutes. And then I'd like for you guys to come back and just kind of share with me your thoughts. You know, if you were LGI, what would you think? What do you think the challenges are? What do you think the opportunities are? Should they ignore it? Just what's your feeling there? So what were your thoughts? Like, what did you guys talk about? Kendall, you have any thing to share?
Well, as a crusty old industry veteran, I kind of threw cold water on it.
Okay.
I don't think you can ignore the cost advantage, and I think that and given the fact that we have a housing affordability crisis in this country, and there's not a real end to it in sight, I don't think you definitely can't discount it, but you also can't underestimate how difficult it is to change the trade base that builds houses right now, and the process that takes a house. Because it's right now, because there's so much opportunity for innovation in home building to begin with. If you think about it this way, if cars were built the way houses are, a Camry would cost $100,000, because there's such an ignorant, and long-standing disjointed. The process of design is separated from the design process of construction, and then the process of construction in turn is broken up and fragmented into as many possible, sub processes as you can, each of which is optimized for themselves, but the whole process is never optimized. And so consequently, there's an enormous amount of opportunity for something like this to go in and completely bypass that integration issue of the process. But the problem is somebody still has to put in the wiring, somebody still has to put in the lighting, the HVAC, all those things. And those people, those individual human beings, have tools. They don't have capital, but they have tools that they use for a certain purpose right now, and getting them to change their orientation on that with just a little bit of, to change it dramatically, they probably need completely different tools. They might need even different skills. Those guys are really hard to reorient.
And I think that's what happens is, there's this, so you start out with an innovation, and then there's the challenges to scale it, but then there becomes a solution to the challenge that starts to kind of open it up. So I think it'll be interesting to see how those things play out, because there's definitely, at least as far as like my recommendation for LGIs, I feel like they need to stay close to it in some way, right? Because those things, those challenges, in some ways over time at some point, and that's always the challenge. When do they get overcome? Like, what's the timing, But to that point though, I feel like they need to stay close to it in some capacity,
100%.
and it would have to, but to do it You don't want to bring it into their existing, you know, business, because that would just, you know, nobody's going to be interested in that. The one thing I thought would be really cool though, is if, you know how like LGI has homes from 166 to say 350. If there were a way that, you know, maybe somebody still has 250,000 that they want to invest in their home, but if this much of it now had to go to the structure, then that means this much of it can go to the cool stuff, like the stuff that makes it a home. And maybe you could have a really rocking home for $200,000 if, you know, the core costs were a lot lower. So I thought that was interesting. Anybody have, oh, I'm sorry.
That cost advantage can't be ignored. That will eventually, you know, come into play. But I get the point that the way it looks to me is the rate of adoption of that is going to be, given that cost advantage, is going to be much slower than it seems like it should be.
Agreed. And a lot of times it's like adoption can be affected by who adopts, right? Like, are there any players that have enough, you know, significant scale to move the market in any way? But I understand. I mean, it's definitely out there. Did anybody have anything?
One of those things where somebody will solve a material part of that problem, and then there will be then it'll cascade very quickly. But so there will be an event that triggers some phase shift there. It's hard to predict what that will be or when, but I do think that because of the cost advantage, that will likely happen. But I'm just saying that I've tried to push innovation into this market in one form or another for like about 20 years, and it's not easy.
But the trigger might have already happened, right? If you think about millennials now that can't buy houses but want to live in houses something like what their parents had, and now you have this way to do it, they're far more comfortable with technology and things like anyone else. So the demand is going to be there. I get what you're saying, Kendall, about having to pull along the people doing it, you know, building the actual houses, but they said they needed 3 people to do that. And then you're still going to need to bring in the trades. I get that. But maybe this is going to come outside, really from outside the industry, in a whole new way of doing it. And then how do you deal with electrical and plumbing and some of the trades that get added? So it may not be the people doing it today that end up doing it in the future.
No, I think that's a fair observation. And I can't really tell, you know, from what I'm able to see in popular media, what those adjustments will be by those trades and what the extent of that is, and how those processes could even be shortcut, you know, because of the spacing in the walls and, you know, the way it's actually designed. That's entirely possible. But I wouldn't completely discount that, Doug.
Yeah.
So I thought it was just a fascinating example, you know, just to kind of bring it home about something that's happening today. And it'll be very interesting too to see internationally what might happen, because outside of the US, there are places where like manufactured housing, like manufactured homes are premium. Like they're a premium, like you want a manufactured home. In the US, totally different. So it might be interesting, you know, kind of internationally what happens, but that's what I had for you guys. I don't know if you have any more questions. I know we're about to run out of time here, but I'm so happy that you guys were able to join. And I hope I had a great time, but it's not about me. Hopefully you got some value out of it too. I'm going to try to do these once or twice a quarter. So I'll, you know, be on the lookout for that. I'll send you some information and hopefully you can attend the next one. And please join me on fulfillingstrategy.com. Lots of insights there. You don't want to miss it. I don't want you to miss it. So if there's nothing else, thank you for your time. And until next time, work well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
appreciate it.
You guys take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.